You know, I got some really mixed feelings on this level. For the past few worlds, I kept harping on about how everything was super easy, and this is where things start to shift a bit. It's a bit of a difficulty spike. What's interesting about this level is, unlike the other game worlds, there's practically zero beta information on this place. No notes from the developers, and hardly even a single fun fact for me to dish out. What you see is what you get. It's like this level exists in a bit of a vacuum. So, without further ado, let's drain that swamp and see just what's going on here. So for starters, the layout of this place is already a bit different from the other Banjo Kazooie levels. Here you don't have a distinct point of navigation like, say, the lighthouse in Treasure Trove Cove. Rather, this is a pinwheel layout with a distinct point of interest in each corner that will have you looping back to the center when you finish what you have to do there. Everything is pretty compact, so you'll realize if you're going the wrong way pretty quickly thanks to the carefully placed landmarks. Another big shakeup is the bone-hurting juice flooding the entire level. Okay, technically it's piranhas, but it's functionally the same thing. This setup is actually quite similar to Lethal Lava Land from Super Mario 64, and is introduced at a similar point in the game. Now, a little platforming slip-up is going to result in significant pain, unlike in the previous worlds where you always had water to cushion your fall. Bottles does give you some spiffy hazmat boots to cross the gunk, but a strict timer and an inability to use your moves means it's very limited, and you can only really use it in timed challenges set up by the developers. These actually work almost exactly like the original Doom hazmat suit item, funny enough, though the arrow's a bit more practical as you could still shoot as you please. Also, the length of time you have said swamp treaders varies since they're specific to the challenge at hand. The level enemies are pretty much the same power-wise to the previous lineup of foes, just dragonflies and frogs this time. What's funny is the frogs, also known as flibbits for those in the know, can actually hop over your attacks if you aren't spamming the rat-a-tat-rap, like you always should. Seriously, this is the only usable combat move in this game. Your default bear punch is slow and has no range, and the somersault has a tendency to miss since you're locked into position. Pretty sure that the rat-a-tat-rap does more damage anyways. This really pales into comparison to, say, Super Mario 64's combat, because there your attacks work off of your momentum. Here you cancel all your momentum, then attack from the standing position. Thankfully, this all will get fixed later down the road in Banjo Tooie, however, as you get a much larger arsenal to play with. But anyway, so now we have some basic hazards. Cool. The level plays out pretty much like the previous one, shambling about to get your Jiggies and notes. However, we're going to stop seeing Jiggy handouts. The Jiggies from this point on in the game aren't just sitting around so you can hit that 10 Jiggy count nice and quickly. No sir, now we gotta start doing legwork to get our collectibles. The first Jiggy you encounter being a timed challenge involving scrambling up some very thin branches, praying that the camera plays nicely. It's situations like this where you're very glad you have smooth analog control. So that does sound a little tricky, but I said there was a difficulty spike here. Now, spike in this case is code for two of the biggest bastards in this entire game. Tiptup the Turtle and Mr. Vile the Crocodile. You see, for whatever reason, this level, World 4, has the two hardest minigames in the entire game for seemingly no apparent reason, and they're hosted by those two scaly bastards. If the name Tiptup sounds a little familiar, it's because he was actually a Diddy Kong racing character, strangely enough. In the years that followed, he decided to put down kart racing to pick up his music career and discover his love of sadism. To find this guy, you gotta help out a turtle by drilling his feet. As payment, he'll naturally cough up a Jiggy and let you go inside of him, as one would naturally do. Wouldn't be a retro platformer without a little vor. Anyways, inside you were treated to a delightful little concert hall with Tiptup at the podium. It's a game as Simon says, easy enough, but if you pick the wrong turtle, Tiptup decides to attack you with his psychic powers for some reason. Now, I've never been very good at these types of games due to my poor attention span, but there's a slight little detail that makes this significantly more difficult. The fact that the camera pans away when it's your turn. It completely messes you up, it's disorienting. You have your eyes welded on the pattern and boom, you get all flipped around. And the pattern gets really long too. In my opinion, this is the worst minigame in the game just because of how needlessly punishing it is. Remember that a death kills your note score, meaning you'd have to do the entire level again if you screw this up. And if you get this minigame during Grunty's Furnace Fun, you're dead. Just straight up dead. Normally, in a Furnace Fun minigame, if you screw it up, you take a point of damage, and then you get to roll again to do another minigame. Here, though, if you fail, well, guess what? You keep failing, taking health points until you're completely screwed. You don't get to pick another minigame. Now, admittedly, this minigame is very doable if you have, say, like, a piece of paper to write things down, but I tried to do this using the tools the game itself gives you, and it's not a good time. Now, I will admit that this take is a personal take, you know, it's not objectively a fact that this minigame is total bullshit, but it definitely is significantly harder than the minigames you'll see in the later levels. Also, weird little oddity, Tiptup and the Choir poof out of existence once you leave after getting that Jiggy. He will go on to have a short little career in Banjo Kazooie, race once again in the Diddy Kong Racing DS remake, and then promptly never be seen again. Good riddance. He's not the biggest pain in the ass in this swamp, though. That award goes to the infamous Mr. Vile the Crocodile. You see, Mr. Vile is the worst, objectively speaking. To get to this guy, you first need to scoop up a crocodile transformation from Mumbo and stick yourself up a statue's nose. The challenge is very simple on paper. 3 rounds, each more than Mr. Vile does. But each round gets a little bit harder as Mr. Vile gets a little bit faster. Almost suspiciously faster. There's some speedy shoes sitting in the corner that you can use, but you won't unlock them till several levels later, and the difficulty at first seems very doable. However, despite this, and even with the speedy shoes, the average player has a very high chance of getting dunked on. So, the funny thing here is, and something that I learned after the fact, is that the better you're doing, the faster Mr. Vile goes. Meaning, it's actually effective to act brain dead and scramble to win at the very end. Trying your very best means Mr. Vile will try to do your very best +1, which is quite infuriating. Also, if you lose on the final round, you have to do all 3 over again, making you waste a huge chunk of time. To cap it all off, this minigame also shows up again in Furnace Fun, just like the Tiptup Choir. Though, thankfully, this one only takes 1 bite of health when you screw it up, instead of flat out killing you like the Tiptup Choir minigame if you can't get it right. Also, just a few quick notes on this crocodile power-up. First off, this is the second best transformation in the game. It's actually very useful unlike the other ones. You get complete immunity to the swampy water, so you can pick up collectibles as you please. Also, unlike the other transformations, this time you can actually attack, which, while admittedly a bit slippy, is still quite effective at getting the job done. The Croc in general is most likely modeled after the Claptraps from the Donkey Kong series, having effectively the same toolkit as well. There is one admittedly large flaw with the crocodile power-up though, and that's the placement of Mumbo's skull. For some reason, every time you want to turn into a crocodile, you have to go through a very lengthy wading boots course. It's not even a maze, it's just a linear path with no hazards or anything. I'd often find myself switching to the Croc to get a Croc-only item, only to realize that I needed Banjo Kazooie for something else. Only to then realize that, oh wait, I actually needed the Croc again for one last thing. It's a bit of backtracking that really I don't quite understand. There should have been a shortcut or something you could unlock, because it really does suck up a lot of time having to run loops. Anyways, now that we've addressed the reptiles in the room, how does the rest of the level play? Well, it's got a pretty good flow to it. Outside of going back for crocodile-related activities, it's pretty easy to clear out the map with little backtracking thanks to the pinwheel design. There's a teleporting statue called Croctus that you'll have to fire eggs into, and it's a good test to see if you understand the lay of the land. Also, as usual, there is a mini-boss in the form of a horde of gold flippet frogs that hippity-hoppity when you step on their property. Though, considering the fact that Wonder Wing is now a thing at this point in the game, they're pretty pitiful, as with most of the mini-bosses. That pretty much sums up all the noteworthy Jiggies here. Getting the notes can be a bit of a pain with the ouch water everywhere, but there's a good enough amount of health sitting around, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Overall, I think it's a very good looking level for what they're going for. The surrounding forest is just a flat tile texture, but it has a good level of detail so you can still buy into it. Forests were notoriously difficult to pull off in this generation. Physically modeling the trees always just sucked up so many resources and pretty much never looked good in these games. The way they have the walls bleed into an inky black sky really gives you the feeling as though you're in the thick of it. Also, as a little side note, the beta version, the sky was actually an orange sunset color, but that was most likely due to it just being a work in progress. Compared to the other levels in this game, Bubblegloop Swamp stands out as being the first one where you really have to start putting some effort into to actually beat it. And its pinwheel design plays a bit differently from the usual level structures. It also starts this trend of new abilities getting increasingly more niche as the game goes on. While the wading boots sure are handy in swamp water, there's only a few cases in the game where you're really gonna need them. And that's the case with most of the remaining power-ups you're gonna run into. Now, would I personally consider this a good level? Personally, I always viewed the swamp as something to just get over with so I can get on to the more exotic levels. There's no ideas here that are particularly unique for platforming games, especially when compared to all the cool stuff the previous World Clanker's Cavern had to offer. I mean, as a general platformer level, it's good, but I definitely think it's the weakest level in Banjo Kazooie. The minigames are pretty painful, and they also come back later to bite you in the ass during Furnace Fun. And the Mumbo Skull location it can lead to some pretty bad backtracking. Also, this level didn't have that much of a legacy either, to be honest. There are some certain swampy areas in Banjo-Tooie's Mayhem Temple which seem to be inspired by it, but ultimately this will be the last we see of the swamp, though it's very likely that it's connected to Banjo-Tooie's Grunty Industries with a very similar looking swampland attached to the facility. Though geography in the Banjo universe has always been a bit hazy. But anyways, that's all I got in regards to Bubblegloop Swamp. If anyone has any additional insights they'd like to give me, please hit me up in the comments, as, to be honest, there doesn't seem to be that much info out there on this level. If you liked what you see, give me a big old thumbs up. Until next time, see ya!